as to how those things work. Once we come into the matrix and agree to do that, once we come into the time matrix and decide to be part of the space-time hologram, we've agreed to adopt those basic rules. So in that sense, we've given that part of our free will over to the privilege of having the experience in the time matrix. Now, within that framework of free will, within a greater framework of fixed, let's say, predestination, there are options available to us. They're called probable realities. That means there are, from any moment point, there are at least several, sometimes many, many, different courses of action that can evolve from that point. Because time is simultaneous and space occurs all in the same place, we will see one version of the possibilities of a choice or an event, but every other version will be experienced very often by a part of ourselves. The process of coming together, of reclaiming your consciousness as an avatar, is bringing together all of those probable selves, the pieces of yourself that followed this idea or that train of development. There are parts of ourselves now that are part of various different reality systems that are intimately connected to this one, probable versions of this space-time frame that have a probable version of history. The history that we have, that we're vibrationally connected to from our moment point, was created by a certain series of choices on a mass level, on a race level. It's called race karma, if you want to look at it that way. Race and planetary karma. There's also a galactic level of karma and a universal level of karma. Karma is really the accumulation of our choices. It determines what set of probabilities we as an individual will see. When we get home and are completely out of the matrix, we've experienced all of them because we pull all of our parts together. Now, within this field of probable action, probable choice, and probable realities, there is one version that contains all the others. It's called the heroic probability. In terms of a small self, you could look at it as the self that's going to be the one that accretes or pulls together all the others. It'll be the self that all the others will experience, let's say, their body death point or their body ascension point, and they will merge with the consciousness of the heroic probable self. There are probable selves for planets and for galaxies and for universes. So there are heroic selves for each of those levels. Right now, in our time continuum, we are encountering the heroic version of our planetary and galactic karmic or choice pattern. We are in the probability where something called the final conflict drama is beginning to unfold. Now, this has been a probability or a possibility that we would see ever since the Atlantean period that I speak about. That Atlantean period, you could say, ended in 9558 BC, but it began very long ago. It began here with the first seeding, which was 250 million years ago on this planet. There were two, actually that was parallel Earth 250 million years ago. 25 million years ago, seeding one took place here, where the angelic human race was put here for the first time. It was destroyed by something called the Electric Wars 5.5 million years ago. Then there was a second seeding. They were destroyed by a very long-term war that was called the 1,000 Years' War. And then there was something called the Treaty of El Anu that was formed. It was an agreement between some of the fallen Anu Elohim races and the Emerald Covenant races, the Christos Founders races, that they would attempt for the third seeding, that they would stop warring with us and they would attempt for the third seeding to do bioregenesis for their races. The third seeding of our angelic human lineage began with the creation of the halls of Amente stargates. It began with the creation of the Ark of the Covenant, which was part of the Amente Stargate system. The Amente Stargate system began being built much earlier. It began being built in 560 million 50 million years ago, when the whole drama of warring with the Anu Elohim from Terra in density 2 came down to density 1. Progressively, more of the halls of Mente structure were put in from that period. And for the third seeding, because there had been so much damage done to the planet between the electric wars of the first seeding and the 1,000 Years Wars of the second seeding, there was another, let's say, bypass. It's almost like a heart bypass, where you're bypassing the arteries that no longer work. They created the Ark of the Covenant, which was how our third seeding races were seeded onto this planet. When you come through stargates to get into a planet, it implies that your template takes upon the coding. It takes on the coding, the mathematical coding of the stargates you come through. The Ark of the Covenant comes through from D12, which in our universal system is a place called Lyra Aramatana. That's our divine blueprint. And instead of going 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, like would be the normal case, so you get all of the coding, it goes from D12 to D9, which is Merak Andromeda, to D6, which is Sirius B. Then it crosses over through D5, which is Terra, or Alcyone in the Pleiades. Then over to D4, which is our solar gate, and down into D3, which is the Earth gate. So we have the coding of the Ark of the Covenant contained within us. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't a big gold box that people were chasing around, but that was a little, let's say, sleight of hand that the Jehovian Anunnaki created in order to, let's say, divert attention after the Atlantean drama. So any recollection of things like Ark of the Covenant would have other meanings, so the races would never remember. Now, we're in a probability where, because of a set of choices that have been made through Atlantis, from the period of, let's say, 50,000 BC up to 9,558 BC, that put us on a course of action that got us nearer and nearer to the heroic probability. But the heroic probability had the greatest potential of fulfillment, because it had the potential for fulfillment of the divine blueprint of this planetary system and this galactic system after literally 250 billion years of warring and having this system ripped apart. So it held the greatest potential victory, but it also had the greatest potential intensity as far as what the drama would look like. It wasn't known until literally the year 2000 whether or not this drama would be fulfilled during this period of time. We could have taken another probable version and waited about 2,000 years before we had to finish this. And by then, maybe the Anunnaki races and the Elohim races and the Draconian races might have been more, let's say, matured. Doubtful, but it's possible. It would have given them 2,000 more years to decide whether they wanted to play fair and whether they wanted to end up on the Christos side of the time matrix when the matrices were separated from each other. In the year 2000, some wonderful things happened that changed and locked us into our heroic probability. When we were able to anchor D12 frequency here for the first time since 208,216 BC, the fact that we had the D12 frequency available meant that the final conflict drama, the stargates would open, which meant the final conflict drama would unfold. Now this drama is so large that from our perspective here, it can seem overwhelming at first. That's why they've given it to us in pieces. For the last 2 years, we've been getting pieces of the history so we could understand one piece and then see where that piece fit into the next. There's a very long history here that has to do with Metatronics, and it has to do with a being called Metatron, and it has to do with the Anu Elohim. If we can understand the place that we exist within right now without letting it freak us out, just overwhelm us to where we want to go hide and believe in anything except this because it's too big and too scary and too much in the drama to deal with. If we can just face it and say, boy, that's interesting, didn't teach that in high school. We can stay in our power during this. Right now, we're on a planet where most of the people are what we call sleepers. They're going to stay that way in this cycle. There's not enough time, and the drama has gone too far, too fast, for them to have time to sufficiently wake up and begin to understand these things. There are so many people that are absolutely addicted to dogmas because they've been told that's the way it is. Their generations before them have been told that's the way it is. They find their race identity through identifying themselves with any particular dogma. There are people in these regions that identify with the Olympian god dramas and all of that. There are the Christians that identify with the Christian dogmas. There are the Muslims that identify with the Muslim dramas, etc., etc., etc. If people could step beyond the dogmas and look for what the dogmas were originally intended to lead them toward, they would begin to look inside themselves But their dogmas have taught them to be afraid of themselves. They've taught them that their God is outside and that they have to grovel in order to even get audience with that God. That's an illness. It's an illness like a virus that was given. That virus takes a while to cure, just like a computer virus. You can't just push a button and it's gone. Sometimes you really have to heal that program before the virus goes away. The races on the planet now are in no way prepared to hear the things that you're listening to now. But there are some, like you, that catch a little bit of information here or there and it resonates. It's like, I want to find out more about that. You guys are the courageous ones. You want to know. You don't care what book you have to throw in the trash. You want to know what the truth is because you have a feeling for connection to God. You have a feeling that came with you in this lifetime and in many others, and that's feeling that guided you. You wouldn't have that feeling if you didn't have some degree of a Christos spark at birth. That means even if you started out as an Illuminati race person in one of the earlier dramas, you have managed to bring enough of the bioregenesis into the DNA where you have at least some of the 12 subharmonics and some of the strands, or you wouldn't relate to this material at all. It would completely turn you off and you probably hate the messenger, like a lot of people out there do. Now, when we get into Metatronics, Metatron, who is Metatron? Where'd that word come from? Metatron is the name of a family collective. It's a family collective out of an entity. Now, an entity is something above a rishi, the first level of ascended masters, consciousness collective. There's an entity called Giovanni. Giovanni was an entity in good standing, as most entities are. Giovanni was part of the collective that created the Christos founders races that seeded this time matrix 950 billion years ago. It was the groups of Elohim that were commissioned to Stargate 11, which was Avion in Lyra. They were commissioned as the guardians, the Christos founders guardians of Stargate 11, that became convoluted, code convoluted, which began their downfall, both genetically, template-wise, and of consciousness. That particular group were out of the entity called Giovanni. Because of the fall that took place, the genetic fall and the creation of the black hole that I'll talk about in a minute, was created 250 billion years ago. The entity, Giovanni, fell. Because there's a law of physics that applies. If you are an ascended master being, you have your pieces up there, your parts of self stationed out of the time matrix. You send in X amount of energy of yourself into the matrix. If you sent in, and most don't, but on occasion, as an ascended master collective will send in more than a natural proportion of its energy into the matrix, say for a salvage mission. If the salvage team you sent in goes down too, it takes the whole collective down. So there was an entity that fell as a result of what took place 250 billion years ago. 250 billion years ago in Lyra, there was something called the, oh boy, what did that do?
Somebody doesn't
They're called the Lyran Elohim Wars.
I brought you to show you. How you
250 billion years ago, an event took place in the Lyra star system, the cradle of Lyra, with the Christos founders races, the races from Stargate 11, the guardians of Avion Gate 11, and the guardians of Gate 10, which is Vega Lyra, began to war with each other because both of them suffered code convolution. The Omicron Draconian races, who were of the Seraphim, were the Gate 10 guardians, and a particular group out of the Giovanni entity of Elohim were the guardians of Gate 11. Both of them were getting a bit out of hand as far as taking a free will concept and literally turning it in on itself and becoming authoritarian. Because free will and authoritarian dictatorship do not go hand in hand. They are in direct opposition. Both of them began to play that game with each other. And after a while of the D11 Elohim pushing the Draconians around, the Draconians managed to evolve in a certain way that they were a bit stronger. So they began to take back territory. They began to push back. And at this point, the Elohim commissioned High Council, which were the ones who were guardians, the Elohim, the Elohai Elohim, who were guardians of Gate 12, and they said, these guys are out of control. We want you to destroy them. And we said, excuse me, we don't destroy anybody. By the way, did you notice that you've been out of control for a while, too? Why don't we all sit down and figure out how we can help both of you heal? They didn't like that answer. They threatened High Council that if you don't destroy them, we'll destroy them. And not only that, we will destroy your gate and you as well, and we will take over the Matrix. That was a very sick decision to make. It was a choice that was made because they had an idea. These were Creator God people. These were Elohim that knew just almost as much as the other Elohim. They knew that if Source could create using the template that we talked about yesterday in the Dance for programs, where you have 15 spheres, what if you took just 7? They knew there was a way to bend the mathematics, which would bend the light and the sound and the scalar waves into a form that could actually repel itself and cut itself off from the natural matrix. It would still exist within the entire matrix, but it would be their own system. They decided they wanted to turn this time matrix into that, which was a direct violation of something called the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant was the original agreement that the Giannis Ascended Masters agreed upon when they decided to create this time matrix together. It was a free will system, and it was built upon the law of one, which is acknowledgement that we are all of the same source, and that loving co-creation is the only sane and natural way of being in an understanding of yourself as part of the one. That was the original tenets and precepts by which this matrix was created. The Elohim of Gate 11 decided that they were going to do it different. They were going to break that covenant, and they were going to destroy the races who wouldn't cooperate with them, and they were going to take it over and run it their way. The only thing standing in their way of doing that were the Elohai Elohim of Gate 12. They could dominate the things lower in coding than them. They could, when push came to shove, use their ability to run higher frequency because they had the D11 coding. The Seraphai Seraphim had D10 coding. So they could, if they wanted to, use that superiority and ability to run frequency to get rid of the Draconian races. But they would have a hard time doing it to get rid of the Elohai Elohim races because they had D12 and higher capacity. But there is a way to turn the natural physics of creation in on itself. If you can think of the Cathara grid and the Stargate systems as a conduit of energy, and when energy is coming into the matrix, it spirals down through the primal light and sound fields into D12 and then D11, 10, 9, 8. Now, if you block energy at Gate 11, the energy is still coming in through 12, but it bounces back. And it creates a backflow that amplifies. So you can, and it was theoretic at that point, theoretically, you could sever the connection at Gate 12 and have Gate 11 and down be your own little universe if you wanted to hijack it. That was their idea. It worked. And there was a choice that the Elohai made. There is a choice to defend or to allow. Now the Elohai knew that they were eternal. Death isn't something that frightened them. They were completely beyond that. They knew that if they were to defend themselves because they had superior power capacity, that those who attempted to destroy them would literally have the energy bounce back at themselves and literally wipe them out and the systems they were connected to. It would not only take out the Elohim that were posing the challenge, it would take out the Seraphai Seraphim, both the fallen ones, and a group called the Odedicron. The Odedicron were a race of Seraphai Seraphim who had co-governance over Stargate 10, Vega, with the Omicron Draconians. The Odedicrons were the reptilians. There was a difference between the Draconians and the reptilians. The Draconians were the dragon moth people. They were the dinoids. They created dinosaur-like, as opposed to snake-like. as opposed to smaller reptilian. The Omicron dragon moth dinoids were fully involved in the competition for the time matrix. They knew what the Elohim were going to do, and they decided they would do it too. They didn't petition for help. They said, fine, we'll both get rid of them, and then we'll go after each other and see who gets the matrix. But the Odedicron, the reptilians, didn't want to play the game. They were stuck in the Gate 10 system, and they petitioned for help. But because you had Gate 11 and the Elohim in the middle, in between Gate 12 and Gate 10, we weren't able to rescue or get the Odedicron out. So if the decision to defend by simply putting up a shield around Gate 12 was chosen, it would have taken out both Gate 11 and Gate 10, which could have been repaired. It would have taken a long time, but it could have been repaired using Gate 12. But those consciousness that were in those systems would be fragmented back to space dust. They'd still be part of God, as I've said. You can never be not part of God. But races that had beautiful potential, and they'd already come a long way in their evolution. They'd evolved from 950 billion years ago to 250 billion years ago. That's a lot of evolution. And they had reached wondrous things in their own right in certain ways. It was primarily because of the Odedicron, of the reptilians, that the founders chose to allow, knowing they were taking a burden onto themselves. But it was the only way that if they allowed it, they would slowly be able to heal it. They knew a black hole would be created if this were allowed. They tried to talk them out of it, but they didn't want to listen. The Elohim did not want to listen. Instead of defending themselves, they allowed the Elohim to back up Gate 11 and reverse it. And that created a backflow, and it literally shattered the divine blueprint and blew up the stargates in Lyra Aramitena. That would have to be reassembled later using the D13 and higher primal light fields to reset the pattern. It created a black hole system. That black hole system came to be known as Phantom Matrix. Phantom Matrix was originally a part of this time matrix. Phantom Matrix started with simply part of the D11 Avion gate and what was that planetary system or star system, and the D10 Vega Lyra system. But it grew much bigger than was ever intended. When the Phantom Matrix was created by the Anu Elohim, they came to call themselves the Anu Elohim. The Giovanni entity hadn't fully fallen. A portion of that entity had fallen. And because of that, it sent another portion of itself into the matrix to try to rescue the part of itself that had fallen. That was a risky thing to do because, again, it comes down to how much energy is on which side. Normally, an entity would put X amount of itself into the matrix at one time. Well, it already lost a big chunk of itself, so it put more of itself in, and there was a chance that was taken. If that part ended up getting distorted also and wasn't strong enough to pull the others back out, it would make more critical mass of reversed mess in the matrix than what the collective had itself, the Ascended Master Collective had itself. And that is what happened, but it happened in stages. When the original fall happened, the original sin, when Stargate 11 blew up 250 billion years ago, and Phantom Matrix was created, there were precautionary things put in motion, knowing that it was going to occur. There was something called the Eye of Brahman that was created at D12.5. Now that was a little bit beyond the D12 Stargate. If the Eye of Brahman was a polarization refraction lens that would allow the primal light fields from the natural to this time matrix to refract through and literally anchor into the Phantom Matrix, to hold it, to give it a structure so it could begin to restructure itself instead of going completely back to space dust. Because what happens when a black hole is created? A template is shattered like a crystal that's crushed with a hammer. It gets twisted, the energy gets twisted and reversed, But if it has any portion of its template that has enough frequency, it can begin to accrete again. What usually happens in a black hole system is it accretes like to like frequency, but it's missing pieces, and it isn't able to accrete functionally. So it accretes on a distorted template compared to its original mathematics. The Eye of Brahman was intended to allow the pattern of the natural template of this time matrix to be put back in to phantom matrix. So when it began to reaccrete itself and the consciousness began to pull itself together, it would still have, eventually, after it accreted enough, it would have access to getting plugged back in to its original divine blueprint. That was the original intention. So there was a lens, the first eye, the Eye of Brahman, created. And it was created by the Christos founders and the Yanis, ascended masters races, in order to give the beings that would be caught in the black hole system an opportunity to re-evolve instead of being, blown back to space dust. And again, it was done primarily because you had several innocent races, but primarily the Odedicron, who had been persecuted by the draconian races progressively more and more. There was no way they could get out of the system, and they had always been in good standing with the Christos founders races. So there was a commitment made on behalf of them, but also on behalf of the others, because even though the Elohim had gone off on their own tangent and become very dangerous creator gods, they had become anti-creator gods, anti-Christic creator gods, they were still loved, and there was still if there's life, there's hope, hopefully, So it was a decision of love, but it was a decision of accepting, out of love, accepting a huge, massive responsibility. The responsibility of knowing how dangerous this healing experiment could be. Because if it went wrong, if it went bad, it could not only take down this whole matrix, but if it did, that would allow it to have enough frequency where it could begin to poke holes into other time matrices as well. It wasn't a decision that was made by a couple of people. It was a decision that was made through the Ascended Masters Yanis councils of various different time matrices that could be directly affected if it went wrong and if it went bad. There was a whole lot of them that didn't want it tried, but there was enough, and it came down to a vote. And it came down to some of the older time matrices that were much older than 950 billion years old, had been through something similar to this long time before, and didn't work. I said, okay, you guys have a good idea, sweet children. You really, really, really want to try it. Now, you've looked at what could happen. The outcome, if it's successful, we will look up to you because we tried a similar thing when a similar thing happened in our matrices, but it didn't work, and it created absolute havoc. We would have liked for it to work. So, because we would like to know where we went wrong, maybe you can do it better. And if you're willing to take responsibility, that means you don't get out of there. If it goes bad, you stay in there until you fix it, right? So it doesn't hurt anything else. So the creator gods, the Anu Elohim and the Seraphai Seraphim and the Brahmarama races that were the original three Christos founders races of this matrix, and their Yanis Ascendant Masters collective said, yeah, we want to try. So the permission was given for us to try. And that's why the Eye of Brahman was allowed to be set up. So the phantom matrix wouldn't just go back into implosion within itself. Because when a system goes into black hole and it begins to accrete, it will accrete to a certain point where it begins to literally pull energy from itself because it pulls all its pieces together and it has nothing left to do but continue to pull. And it pulls itself into compaction. And it goes into what's called molecular compaction or atomic compaction, and it implodes on itself. It has to do with magnetic and electrical fields. So, by setting up the Eye of Brahman, there was an opportunity being made where the black hole would accrete, but at a certain point in its accretion, it would reach enough frequency in reverse that it could possibly be plugged in to the D13 primal light fields so it could be brought back around. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try, at least so we thought at the time. Well, when this occurred, one of the big heroes in the drama was going to be Giovanni. Giovanni wanted to make sure, because Giovanni felt responsible, because it was Giovanni's family that had created the fallen Elohim. There's a particular collective of the Giovanni family, like a smaller family within a family, that was called Metatron. Metatron, at a certain point, became directly involved. Now, the Eye of Brahma was set up 250 billion years ago in preparation for, it was actually set up before they did the final blowing up of Stargate 12. That's when the decision to allow was given. Once the Stargate blew up, the Eye of Brahman activated, and it began to hold the Phantom Matrix from totally going into reversal, where it dropped so low in frequency that you couldn't plug into it anymore. And there was a degree of successful evolution between 250 billion years ago and 150 billion years ago. We got a lot of the Odetticron races out, and even some of the fallen Nano-Elohim and fallen Draconian races were able to do bioregenesis and get back out into the natural matrix. There was a problem that was manifesting itself in relation to some of the Nano-Elohim that were being rehabilitated, the ones that had been out of the Metatron Giovanni collective. You could get them out to about D11, and then they were what's called host matrix, because they didn't have the D12 frequency anymore. They were hosted into another collective of the Brahmarama races. So you ended up with a hybrid, because the Brahmarama races had the lowest frequency of the Christos founders races. So the Nano-Elohim had the second highest before they couldn't plug into their own matrix, so they were hosted through the Brahmarama races. But they still held a mentality, even after they would undergo hosting, of dictatorial type governments. Their distortions had gone so deep, and because they still didn't have a full D12 pattern back, at D12 you start to get something. You start to get it consciously. You start to feel it. We are all one. That means I am you and you are me. That means I treat you the way I would want to be treated. That means we cooperate and not fight. Without the full D12 pattern, that cognition cannot fully come in. So they still didn't have that cognition. They began to pose a danger to, even when they'd be hosted out, they were posing a danger to the Brahmarama races. So there was another decision made, and this is where Metatron came in full force. There was another lens put in, another polarization refraction lens. The original one stayed, the Brahmarama, or the Brahman, the Eye of Brahman stayed. That was to hold Phantom Matrix intact. This other lens, that was called the Eye of Yahweh, or Yod-He-Vod-He, was put in. It was the Metatronic eye. It was put in to allow a, shortcut. So the races, the fallen Nano-Elohim races, because they were still posing a danger, where they could do a shortcut, they didn't have to make it all the way up to D12, they could do a shortcut into another matrix that was actually more authoritarian. It was not a matrix that was originally created on a free will system. It was a healing matrix, almost like how you look at our, perhaps our prisons for violent criminal type people. And it was agreed, the Metatron and the Giovanni entity agreed that their races needed rehabilitation, more strict rehabilitation. They were still not capable of functioning fairly in a free will system. They would abuse if they were given power. And because of that, the Metatron collective created, and were permitted to create, the Eye of Metatron, or the Eye of Yahweh. They're one and the same. This lens was it was positioned at D11.5, which is between gate 11 and gate 12. All right, so it wasn't as high up in frequency as the Eye of Brahman. And it was they would be able to evolve and get that mathematical coding, and then it would take them over into another matrix system. And it was actually another black hole system that had made some progress. It was the original one from way back that the other time matrices, the other Yanis ascendant masters had said, well, we tried and it didn't work. Right. They were still trying to heal and rehab that one, and there were certain portions of it that were rehabbing. They were partially successful. So it was decided by the Metatron entity and its Giovanni collective and the Ascended Masters collectives that the ones that were causing problems, they could, for the Brahmarama races, would be hosted out into this matrix where they could finish their evolution there. All right. This was originally supposed to be an evolutionary shortcut, because in certain terms, if they were successful there, it would take them less time to evolve back into full ascended mastery than if they stayed here to fully regenerate the Christos template. There were certain perks for them to go. It was originally called the Path of Arimathea. It had to do with a planet or a star called Arimathus that was part of this matrix. Now, Arimathus, at the time that these decisions were made to allow the Eye of Metatron to be put in, Arimathus was kind of like a crown jewel in that particular fallen matrix, because it was beginning to get its D11.5 frequencies back, where it was this close to being able to go back into being reversed to a D12 natural pattern. So there was this chance taken by putting in the Metatronic eye, or the eye of Yahweh, that would create a link between that system. It was supposed to be a one-way link. You could go this way, but they could not come this way. All right, that was to protect this matrix. It didn't link into this matrix, it linked into Phantom, and Phantom linked into here. Well, large numbers of the fallen Anu Elohim did evolve out via the Eye of Metatron, or the Eye of Yahweh. And then a problem happened over in Aramat. We call it Aramat for short. And Arimathus, the new influx of the still semi-distorted consciousness from this matrix got together with the distorted consciousness from other systems in that matrix and invited them up to Arimathus. And together they took over Arimathus. And this created a situation for the Giovanni Metatron family. They were losing some of the guardian ones that they had sent in to assist had actually gone into the Phantom Matrix and escorted the others out into the other matrix. And when there were rebellions over in their system, it was called the Wisadek system. When there was rebellion in the Wisadek system, the guardian races sent by Metatron and sent by Giovanni were also overtaken, and their consciousness was entrapped. There are certain ways you can entrap a being in a body, and we'll get into this in a little bit. It has to do with creating an electrostatic body as opposed to an electrodynamic body. An electrodynamic body allows frequency to move freely through. An electrostatic body keeps it circulating, where it just circulates within itself and it blocks the currents. There were particular genetic experiments done, and also planetary grid experiments and galactic grid experiments done in the Wisadek matrix that created a situation where about 89% of the energy of Giovanni Metatron was literally put into reversal. And when that happens, it creates like a black hole pulling on the Ascendant Master Collective itself. And there was a choice made by that matrix to either sever its connection completely to those of itself that it had lost. What this meant was it was going to fall. One way or another, it was going to fall. Because if you can't hold enough frequency to stay in resonance with the primal light and sound fields, with the primal sound fields, especially where the Ascendant Master levels are, that means you're coming into the matrix whether you want to or not. All right, if you lose a certain percentage as an Ascended Master, if you lose a certain percentage of your consciousness, because it's embodied in things that fall, they will pull you in. And the Metatron Giovanni Collective realized it was going to go in. It could have maintained itself at a D12 level and began its evolution from there. It would have had a big chore on its hands. It would have had to sever, first of all, its connection to its parts that were in the Wisadek matrix. And then it would have had to progressively accrete frequency until it could host out It would have to host out, and it would become kind of like a baby ascended master collective again, instead of a very old-time collective. The collective made a decision, and it was the collective, the Metatron collective of the Giovanni collective. They made a decision that they would do their fall in a certain way. They started to have, you can almost look at it as a virus. The parts of themselves that had fallen were still in communication electronically with the collective. Now, the ones that were in the matrix didn't know it, but every little thought that the fallen ones felt, its Ascended Master collective felt, and it began to take on the same attitudes. And one of the biggest and worst attitudes, and it's still a virus in this time matrix, is the attitude of blame. The Metatron entity, the Giovanni Metatron entity, decided to blame the other Ascended Master collectives for its fall. It was reminded that it agreed to do this. It was the one that was gung-ho, going to save the matrix, going to pull all its cells out and all that. But it had enough of the influence of its fallen ones. There were 89% of its consciousness at this point, saying, it's somebody else's fault. It's your fault, so we're going to pay. That collective made a decision that it would use its knowledge of primal creation physics, and that it would take over the matrix, this matrix. That was originally what its fallen parts had wanted, and what it had tried to stop its fallen parts from doing. And there was a little problem when this decision was made, because there was the Eye of Yahweh, the Metatron Eye, that was completely under the governance of the Metatronic entity of Giovanni. The Giovanni entity, through the collective of Metatron, turned control of that polarization refraction lens over to the Wisadek collectives. And they were able to use that to display it. It was already tapped into the phantom matrix on this time matrix. They were able to create, by feeding energy off this time matrix and off phantom, they would pull energy from our time matrix, from the phantom matrix. They would use phantom matrix to pull it from here into their matrix. As long as they were able to feed off something else that had its life force connection to source, they wouldn't go into implosion. If the matrices were severed, they would go into implosion eventually. They get a few billion years of evolution out of it. But eventually they would be a deteriorating system. They would become extinct in terms of the race identity that they held. They would go back to source as units of consciousness. And that was unacceptable to them. Now, when the Metatron collective made the decision to turn the Eye of Yahweh over to the Wisadek matrix, it had to be reprogrammed. The original program, mathematical scalar program of the Eye of Metatron, was compatible with this time matrix and with the phantom matrix and with source. It had the potentiality of regenerating into Christos. In order to do what they did by allowing creating the Eye of Metatron in a way, putting a program in that would allow it to actually reverse certain things so it could feed instead of just being a conduit that could take some energy, which was supposed to be the collectives getting hosted over, it would be able to open it both ways, send energy in and pull energy out. In other words, send energy in as a carrier wave to drag more energy out than it was supposed to. In order to do this, the programming on the Eye of Metatron had to be changed. It had to be changed from its original base 12, base 15 compatible, and I mean base 12, base 15, the D12 Christos pattern, but built on those 15 spheres that we talked about yesterday in, the basic structure, where you have a set of 7, and then another set of 7, and then that takes place within one. All right, so you have 15 spheres. The mathematics were altered in the Eye of Metatron lens to a base 7, where it was like taking the yolk out of an egg. So they would build their system, they would restructure their black hole system on the 7 pattern, which was literally cutting it off from the primal light and sound fields, but allowing it to plug into other systems on their lower heavens level that were built on the 7. because you have the seven higher and lower heavens. So they took the lower heavens pattern, used it to reprogram and organize their black hole, and that allowed them to be able to tap into other lower heaven systems, other Veka systems. This created a distortion in the consciousness that was part of the Wisadek matrix. The Wisadek matrix people were doing bad enough as it was before they had Metatron get involved. They had certain successes as far as Aramatsus was concerned. Aramatsus was a planet that was, or a planetary system that was evolving close to where it could be brought back to its Christos imprint. But once the Eye of Metatron was used and run through the Aramatsus stargates, it completely changed that. It completely redid the mathematical structure of their stargates so they couldn't plug in to a system, to a Christos system. So it not only posed a threat to our time matrix, but it totally, all the progress that had been made in healing the Wisadek system had been totally unplugged and undone. And the thing with the Metatronic system is it's permanent. Some things in physics can be undone. Some things reach critical mass, and if they reach a critical mass of distortion where there's less than 30% of their natural Christos template left, they become something else, and they're no longer compatible with their own template. That's what happened with the Wisadek matrix. The consciousness that was residing in that matrix and the planetary systems and the stargates in that matrix can't be plugged in again because of the choices that were made. And the main choice was made by the Metatron Giovanni entity, but it was made on behalf of many other collectives of the fallen ones that had petitioned to do, petitioned for them to do this. Please, you have control of the lens. Give us life, give us eternal life. You know that we'll implode. All they had to do was agree to bioregenesis and agree to play fair. If they had entered the Emerald Covenant, they would have been able to evolve out. But it was known, and their scientists, their high-mind scientists knew that if they created this artificial mathematical structure, there was a way of bending light and sound that was based on the Vesica Pisces, two interwoven spheres. Now, the natural time matrix is based on a triveka, not a biveka. First there's a triveka, and the biveka is part of that. You would go single, biveka, triveka. That's a natural structure. What they did was simply use the Eye of Metatron as their 0 point or their 1 point and build a double from there, a biveka from there. They created artificial light through this particular synthesis of mathematics. They created totally polarized light through this process, because at least with the triveka, you have the two polarized points that are unified through the third. In their universe, everything is bipolar. It's like having a real bad chemical day, bipolar disorder. It's a whole universal system that's structured on bipolar disorder, which implies they have extremes of dramas. They have extreme highs and extreme lows, and they're constantly in that cycle. Now, the races that were in the Wisadek matrix at that time, they chose this. They wanted this, most of them, at least the creator gods, what they call themselves creator gods in the matrix, wanted it, because it would promise them one thing. As long as that Eye of Metatron was their vampire energy-sucking device, they would have eternal life. They would be immortal. They would have the closest thing they could get to ascension without having to cooperate. They could have got regular ascension if they just, decided to be nice and didn't want to play Masters of the Universe. The Metatronic bodies that were created through the programming are very interesting structures. They take part of what would be a normal living biological structure, and they take out certain parts, the mathematics that are missing, or pieces of the template that are missing, and they plug in certain parts of the template together that weren't originally meant to be plugged in together. Completely destroys the entire template when it's fully done. There's not 30% left where you can do bioregenesis to plug it back into its natural divine blueprint. It creates an atrocity. It creates something other than what was originally created in the Christos vein, and it creates something that is not compatible with the mathematics or the scalar frequency.